So I'd like to welcome everybody to the Planning Committee of Neath Talbot Council on the 20th of July at 10 a.m. This meeting is taking place remotely via the Teams protocol. So please, if you would take your phones onto silent, use the hand function if you wish to speak, keep your microphones on mute unless I call you to speak, and then we can reduce the feedback that we're getting. Before I go any further, I would just like to say how wonderful it is to actually be in the chamber again. It's been a year March since I was here, but thanks to everybody who's made this possible today. Okay then, we'll go on to part one, item 1, welcome. I've done that. So Tammy, could you please take the roll call, please?
Certainly, Chair. Good morning, everyone. I'll start with yourself. You are present. Councillor Susan Paterson, Chair.
I am indeed, yes.
Thank you. Vice Chair, Councillor Sean Percy.
Present.
Thank you. Councillors Dennis Keogh.
Present.
Rydian Mason.
Present, Tammy.
Thank you. Scott Bamsey. No, Councillor Bamsey. Okay. Councillor Ros Davis.
Presennol, present.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Hunt.
I'm here, Tammy.
Thank you. Councillor Arwyn Woolcock.
Yes, present, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Prothero.
Present, thanks, Tammy.
Thank you. Councillor Suzanne Renkers.
Present.
Thank you. And Chair, we have apologies from Councillor Chris Williams. Then we have also present local ward member, Councillor Chris James. Councillor James? Oh, yeah. Thank you. Good morning. Planning officers, we have Kerry Morris.
Present, Tammy.
Thank you. And Steve Ball.
Yes, present, Tammy.
Thank you. We have environmental health officer, Simon Evans.
Present, Tammy.
Thank you. Highways officer, Justin Griffith.
Present, Tammy. Thanks.
Thank you. Legal officers, Mike Shaw.
Yes, thank you. Present, Tammy.
Thank you. And Gavin White.
Present, Tammy.
Thank you. Myself, Democratic Services Officer, Tammy Davis. And present representing Wales Online, we have Hannah Neary. Okay, I don't think I've missed anyone. Let me know now if I have, please. No? Okay, Chair, that's the roll call complete.
Thank you very much, Tammy, and welcome to the local member and Hannah Neary. This meeting is being recorded, so your continued presence in it is deemed to be giving consent for that recording. So just thought I should add that because I didn't mention it in the beginning. Okay then, so I'm going to ask now members, are there any declarations of interest, please, from members? Tammy, I can't see any. Can you see any?
I can't see any,
No.
Chair.
Okay, thank you, members. I'll go on to then item 3, which is the minutes of the previous meeting, can be found on pages 5 to 6 in the reports bundle. Could I ask somebody to propose they are a true record?
I propose, Chair. I move.
Thank you. And seconded?
Happy to second, Chair.
Lovely. Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Okay, then, so we'll move on to item 4, which is the request for site visits. There have been none. So we'll go on to item 5 on the agenda today, which application P 2021/0637, 161 Neath Road, a change of use from residential class C3 to a 5-bedroom house of multiple occupancy, class C4. Mr. Ball, would you please take the committees through the report? Thank you.
Yes, of course, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to share the screen. Have you, can you view that?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Right, so as the Chair said, this is an application for number 161 Neath Road in Britton Ferry. It is an application similar to a number of applications that have come before committee over the last couple of years for a change of use from residential, which is, as you'll know, a use class C3, to a 5-bedroom house of multiple occupation, forever known as an HMO from now on, which is use class C4. The site is shown on the plan in front of you on the screen, which shows it to be a property just off the main Neath Road, near to a junction with Vernon Street at the top and near the church below. The application has been called to committee by Councillor Chris James, the ward member, who, as you've noted, is here today and will be addressing members after myself. The request that has been made on the first page of the report, effectively in terms of concerns locally about the impact on local amenities because of the density of housing multiple occupation within Briton Ferry East, and the concerns effectively losing more family dwellings can have an impact on a community and losing potential family homes. And these are similar issues that have been raised in different applications we've had before. And as the report says, the chair and I met at the panel and decided that it was appropriate to bring this one before committee. There hasn't been mentioned beforehand, Chair, of the amendment sheet that was circulated yesterday. So I don't know if you want to just confirm that people have seen that, because there is a reference to, there's nothing material in it particularly, but it does note additional representations having been received. I think there's now 13 representations being received compared to the 7 in the report.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Ball. Can all members just indicate if you haven't received that? I see none, Mr. Ball, so thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the site in front of you is the main site plan has been submitted. You can see that the property in front of you, and it is a 2-storey mid-terrace property. It's currently in use as a dwelling. It is next door to a Domino's Pizza, which I'll show you shortly in terms of photos. But you'll note from this photo that just shows the property itself, and then also an area to the rear, which is identified for car parking and also bin storage / clothes drying area. And excuse me, and again, this just shows the existing property that shows in terms of a standard family home in terms of living, sitting, dining, kitchen and bathroom at the bottom with 3 bedrooms above. And the next plan shows that that's intended to be changed in terms of creating, keeping the 3 bedrooms at the top with ensuite, but creating 2 additional bedrooms at the bottom with communal dining room, kitchen and bathroom retained at ground floor. And just for context, that is the property concerned right next to Domino's Pizza. This is the main road through, and you'll see there's other shops, etc. at the end of this run of properties as well. So the application, as I say, proposes a change of use. There aren't any external alterations proposed to the property itself, only internal alterations. And as the plan says, 2 new parking spaces would be created, accessed off the rear lane, together with a bin storage area at the back. That is important to note because, as I'll refer to later, this property is currently not served by any off-street car parking spaces, so additional spaces would be provided. The report goes in and details there have been a number of objections, and as I said, the amendment sheet has increased those to 13 representations. The details are all listed within the report and the amendment sheet, but largely there's I would probably say that the normal kind of concerns about HMOs, which relate to issues to do with parking provision and potential impact on highway safety, issues to do with the potential intensification in the use of the property and potential impact as a consequence, such as noise and bin storage and the like, and other issues about absentee landlords, but also just generally concerns about how an HMO might impact upon community area or community cohesion. The report seeks to address all those points, and you'll note from the report it is very much the same report in terms of the background that has come before members. So I won't go in detail because majority, if not all of you, will be aware of the issues in terms of the control over the Class C4 uses, which was introduced in 2016, and effectively it brings them into control, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're unacceptable. It just allows us as an authority to have regard to the need to ensure that there's no unacceptable concentration of such uses. Effectively, in certain areas, you can have significant concentrations that can then have an impact in terms of community cohesion, but also, as the report says, these are useful and much needed types of accommodation as well in terms of the general housing portfolio or the mix of properties provided. And as the report says, national research has often identified 10% as like a tipping point, which in an area, but it doesn't say that that makes it unacceptable. It just says it can begin to have an adverse impact. In terms of the policy, just to re-emphasise what you'll already know, we do not have a housing multiple occupation policy within the council. That is something that no doubt will be addressed as we move progress through the local development plan review to LDP2 as we know it. But what this application seeks to do is assess the proposal within its immediate context, having regard to the general type of policy or general way in which these things have been assessed, including the way it's been assessed in Swansea, where it looks about the number of properties in an area and within buffer zones, and whether that would effectively tip the balance away from family properties. So the report does show at page 14 of your report, there's a plan in there that indicates that there's what I'd say the odd HMO in the area, but ultimately what the report says is while there are a few Class C4 properties in the area, these are not in terms of a location or relationship to this property, or indeed any degree of concentration such that that would justify any objection on the basis of an adverse impact from an unacceptable or over concentration of such uses. And in that respect, we as officers do certainly understand the views locally and that Councillor Chris James will express about the density of these kind of properties and how it can have an impact. But as I've always said to you, we have to consider each and every one on its respective planning merits. And there can kind of come a time when impact will become unacceptable. But in this area, and certainly on the basis of this application, there's certainly no evidence to substantiate such a conclusion being drawn, such that the principal conversion is acceptable on policy grounds. In terms of visual amenity, I've emphasised that there's going to be some changes at the rear, but not to the actual property itself. It will retain residential appearance, so the only visual impact will be the change to the rear access lane, the rear access yard onto the lane, which I'll just find the photo of. So the photo in front of you now shows the access lane that goes through behind the run of properties. The green bag you see in the centre, it's got the sand in, that is the entrance effectively to the yard. This is what it currently looks like. As you see, the green bag on the right hand side shows the corner I've just shown you, and this area here will be cleared and an area created both for parking and 2 vehicles, and indeed some bin and potentially cycle storage as referred to later as well. And then that is looking back from this junction back towards the main street where they'd come on. So in terms of visual amenity, this proposal will actually improve the rear yard area, and certainly there's no objections in terms of the impact of the use or the changes arising from the rear. Similarly, in terms of residential amenity, there's no issues or unacceptable overlooking over and above what is currently experienced. And while local objections quite often refer to noise and disturbance, ultimately these are not matters of objection that we can raise on this property in terms of its intensity, noting also there are other legislation covering matters such in terms of noise nuisance and environmental health legislation. What it does show in the report on page 15, though, is that the environmental health officers talked about the size of the property and that they are actually requiring, as I think we would have done from planning anyway, to limit the occupancy to a maximum of 5 persons, i.e. 1 person per bedroom. The report also refers to issues about concern that was raised about bedrooms being on the party walls, but again, were not considered to be any unacceptable impact on the adjoining property as a consequence, noting also that one side is Domino's Pizza as well. So there's no justifiable grounds to refuse permission on residential amenity grounds is the conclusion there. I've already referred in the photos to the parking area as well. One of the issues that's been raised locally and by Councillor Chris James is the potential impact on parking and highway safety. This property currently is a C3 use, which has a parking requirement which is not met because there are no off-street car parking spaces. The parking requirements for this C4 use are the same as the existing C3 use, and they are providing 2 spaces. So therefore, this is a betterment along above the existing situation. So therefore, on that basis, there can be no justifiable grounds at all to object to this proposal on parking grounds. Noting also, in terms of the actual area, the layout of the space will be required to be put in a plan to ensure that there's sufficient distance to manoeuvre in and out of those spaces in a safe way onto the access lane. And on that basis, I say that there is no issue in parking safety, parking objections or highway safety. I would draw your attention briefly to the amendment sheet. There was one reference from a local, a concerned local about issues of parking permits being issued willy-nilly, I think is probably the best way of putting it. And I think my understanding is that no more than 2 parking permits would normally be issued anyway. But irrespective of that, that would not be a ground to object based upon the fact that there is a betterment to parking provision for this property. So generally speaking, other matters that are addressed in the report on page 17 are the other concerns, lots of which are addressed within the report. It is obviously something I emphasise that this is a land use planning matter. Quite often emotive concerns locally about who might live in these kind of accommodation, which often it isn't justified. But irrespective of that, it is a land use planning matter. It is not about who may live in a property. So therefore, on the basis of the land use planning issues arising from it, as assessed within the report, Chair, the recommendation on page 18 is to approve subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ball, for taking the committee through that report. Now, I'm going to call on the local member to speak first. Normally, speakers are limited to 5 minutes, but I do not impose that on local members. So, Councillor Chris James, welcome to today's meeting. And now you have your opportunity to address committee. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to take 5 minutes here. But, first of all, thank you for letting me speak today and bringing this in front of the committee, because HMOs are always an emotive subject. And the most emotion that flies around them is not about planning issues. My concerns and why I brought you here today are planning concerns, all about land use. Britton Ferry has got a disproportionate amount of HMOs compared to other areas in Neath and Talbot. It's not the only ward, but it's one of the few wards that's got a very high number of HMOs. I did a freedom of information with the council back 2018, and back then we had 76 HMOs just in my ward in Britton Ferry East. Done a bit of research as well. Home ownership in the wards only at 13% at the moment that homes are actually owned, and nearly a quarter of the housing is privately rented. That's not, sorry, forget that 13%. It's got it written there. I'm sure that's wrong. Please disregard that. But yeah, over nearly a quarter is privately rented in Britton Ferry East. My main concern, and the reason I brought this here today, is that houses like this come on the market and they're being snapped up by property developers, turn them into HMOs, and we're losing those affordable homes the families can get their foot on the housing ladder with. This house sold for £49,500 at auction, and it's being turned into a 5-bedroom HMO. That would have been an ideal starter home for a young family. People on minimum wage jobs could have possibly got a mortgage on that. And these houses, we're losing these houses to HMOs. This is my second time. Last time it was 3 HMOs I brought this to the committee. There's only 1 today. 2 more haven't got to that stage. Luckily, they've been turned on other grounds. But there seems to be a bombardment of people trying to turn these cheap properties into HMOs in Britton Ferry. I understand we've got issues with the LDP. The C4 category came out after the LDP was written. I know Swansea's actually put supplementary planning guidance in place. I don't know if that's something maybe we could look at, because it's not just me. I know HMOs that come into committee in front of you a lot. But my main concern about this is the sheer amount of HMOs we're having, and we're losing those family dwellings, those starter homes. And it's not just my ward. We've got the same in Aberafon ward. They're suffering the same problems, the councils down there. And it needs to be, if we're going to have HMOs, I understand there's a need for this housing. It needs to be spread out more. It doesn't need to be located in the same 1 or 2 areas. It's just the sheer concentration we've got in Britton Ferry. It has changed. All that, I think the right words. The whole feel of Britton Ferry. And the more families we lose, the more that community feel is going to change over time. I say it's that simple. I could try to take up 5 minutes here, but it's straightforward. It's just we're losing the family homes. We get more and more HMOs. It's changing the whole character of my town. But thank you. I say if there's any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Councillor James. Very good of you not to take up too much time, but you are able to speak, not limited to 5 minutes. So now I'm going to open it up to members of the committee to ask any questions, and I can see there's a flurry, so I'll go to Councillor Hunt first of all, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that, Chris. I can see you're emotionally charged this morning, and rightfully so. Chair, we've gone through HMOs regularly at this committee, and I think for Chris's benefit as well, I think we need to point out that the lack of a HMO policy wouldn't necessarily mean that this particular application wouldn't be passed anyway. I think that's important, not for people, and I'm not suggesting Chris, but not for residents and people in our communities to have a better understanding that a policy, while it's very much needed, I know Councillor Woolcock have been on mentioning it regularly, as have other members. We do need a policy. I welcome that policy at a time that we can manage it and look at how it's formed to deliver for our communities. Now, I do take on board some of the points Chris raised about communities like Britain Ferry, and it's worth mentioning that antisocial behaviour is quite high in the areas, and I'm not suggesting there's a coalition with HMOs, but I am suggesting that family homes, if appropriate, we can't determine market forces, Chair, as you have rightly said previously. It's very difficult for whoever buys, but I've raised the concerns of these particular developers who spot opportunities, and they have no affiliation with the communities that they put these HMOs in. And I just wanted to, I may have asked it before to Mr. Ball and others, but I just wanted, while we deliver these, and maybe today we're going to deliver another one, when do we monitor these for what may occur there? And I'm referring to antisocial behaviour and whether police working in partnership. It may not be for this committee, but it is for Neath and Talbot Council to understand where HMOs may not work. I'm not saying they don't. I believe a lot of them do. There is a need for them, but they need to be in the right places, and they need to be with the right clientele or those there. And I got a question for my friend Justin with regards to highway safety. I noticed the parking at the rear tidying up. Now, those lanes are very narrow and very sharp to get in and out of. And when they do get back onto the highways, we're talking about increased traffic now. Have you got to have visual displays? Did it fall, even though it's a use already by others, but because we're increasing the traffic, has this got to come in as a new visual display under the policy to make sure we are having residents and those using it? There's no pavements in those lanes, and I know they've been used, and probably you can give me a history where no accidents have happened, but I am concerned with highway safety, as we all should be. And I just wondered if anybody's walking down the lanes with increased traffic, are we adding to a potential risk of safety? So I could go on and on, as you know, Chair, about HMOs, and Mr. Ball knows many members have continued to address the concerns of them. But I do believe that we need to perhaps explain a little bit better. We need to also get the HMO policy as quickly as possible. It's years now, and the last question then is probably for Kerry, perhaps, with his experience of the LDP. How are we dealing with this HMO? Because it's been a couple of years now, and if it's something that we need to have as sooner rather than later, is that something we could work on, quicker to get it here for when they keep coming, because undoubtedly they're going to keep coming, and I have concerns over them. That's enough from me. I mean, there's other members got hands up, but Chair, thank you for letting me speak. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hunt, Councillor Hunt, sorry. And thank you also for mentioning that even if we had an SPG for this may not have been refused. That is something we do need to take on board. It is an emotive subject, and that is absolutely why up to now I've allowed most HMOs to be called to committee, even though perhaps based on their application, being a bit lenient there maybe. But I've got a couple of questions. So Mr. Ball is indicating to speak, and then you asked a question of Mr. Griffiths and then Kerry Morris. So I'll go to Steve Ball first, please.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I might be able to cover off most of the things, and then Justin and Kerry can probably jump in if I don't do it really. Just before responding to Councillor Hunt's thing, can I just go back to one thing that Councillor James said as well? And you just indicated about the SPG side of things, and that Swansea has one, and could we have one? We've covered this before, and you know, Kerry and I and Lana have thought about this in detail about how we could seek to address this. But the main thing with SPG is it has to be hung on planning policy, and we don't have anything that we can do that in our authority. But you know, there's two ways to look at Councillor Steve Hunt's comments really about the SPGs. You know, ultimately, if we think something's unacceptable, we don't need a policy or SPG to refuse it. And similarly, even if we have a policy and SPG, that doesn't mean we should be refusing unless it's deemed to be harmful. So there's two ways of looking at it. But you know, the report has made it clear, as my assessment, that in this case, it would be very difficult for us to object to the principle of this development, based upon the wider local context. In terms of the matters raised by Councillor Hunt, first of all, you talked about, do we monitor, you know, for what may occur when these kind of C4 use, etc., approved? And generally speaking, it's not the role of the planning system to do so. But what we are aware of, obviously, as an authority, is that there will be a need to introduce or to consider introducing, even though more likely will be introduced, an HMO related policy within LDP2. And therefore, to do that, there will need to be an evidence base prepared, which the policy side will pull together in order to, you know, effectively reinforce the issue and to justify the inclusion of such a policy and the grounds and the basis of that policy. Now, the Swansea policy was founded on substantial evidence, particularly the Litchfield report that was referred to in our reports. So obviously there will be a lot of evidence we need to be prepared. I would have thought that particularly the wards that are most affected, we talked about Aberravon, we talked about in Port Talbot, we talked about, you know, Britain Ferry, obviously, the ward members should be part of that discussion and should be collating the information and the concerns they've got. One thing that Councillor Chris James referred to is I think you said there were 70 odd HMOs. There aren't 70 odd HMOs in terms of from a planning perspective, but I think what you're referring to is what is an HMO in potentially environmental health purposes, where you've got flats effectively can also have the same issues. So I do think it might be a wider discussion of what is an HMO into the planning and the Class C4 and how that might input into policy, but it is a wider discussion. But for now, we are where we are, and we assess on the basis of individual assessments. And as I say, the wider or the existing local context is such that, you know, I cannot substantiate or support based on evidence any refusal of this on policy grounds on this case. In terms of the other issues, the highway side of things, I would just draw your attention to the condition that was that refers to the need for effectively for the layout to ensure there's sufficient distance to manoeuvre in and out of those spaces. And particularly, I'd say that there is no need for planning permission for that access to be created because effectively it's already there. and therefore any issues of intensification, these properties have been used for some time. So therefore, I wouldn't say that there would be any issue in terms of intensification in any respect, even had it not been such that they'd need plan permission. I would say there's no issues in terms of intensification of that. Justin will comment no doubt in terms of visibility displays, which at the entrance of these lanes are always tight, but generally the slow moving nature of traffic is such that it'd be difficult to object on those grounds, although Justin put his hand up, so he will comment in a minute. And in terms of the LDP side of things, I think I've largely covered the issue in terms of the question you asked of Kerry, Councillor Hunt. Generally speaking, it's something that the engagement with all of the local communities and through the LDP process will get a broader understanding of the issues and how we could cover that off in a policy. But it is no silver bullet, for want of a better phrase. And just as background, I spoke to colleagues in different development managers recently, and HMOs is an issue throughout the area, throughout South Wales. There are different policies. That RCT has got a policy, I believe, that covers off the wider HMO issue, potentially with subdivision of units as well. But even the Swansea policy, which I think is a pretty good one, to start with, they weren't getting support from the planning inspectorate with those appeals. But increasingly, apparently, they are now getting that support. So it's not a silver bullet, but once we prepare and get the evidence base to support it, it will allow us to be more firm when we really do feel that there is objections to the intensification of such uses within an area. And I think that's where we'll get to in the future. But going back to my first point, that does not mean that if we thought something was unacceptable, that we wouldn't recommend for refusal, because we've made it clear, for example, in Elba Crescent, that it's probably got to that tipping point now. And if someone comes in irrespective of policy, there may not be a positive support for future applications. So, we'll just, suck it and see as much as anything and deal with every single case on its merits. We acknowledge the issues you're raising, Councillor James, obviously, but the assessment we have to make is within the report. So thank you, Chair. I think Justin will probably want to jump in and tell me I'm wrong now somewhere.
No, thank you, Mr. Ball. Yeah, I do have two members who I acknowledge now, Councillor Wilcock and Councillor Percy, who wish to speak. I just want to go through the officers who have indicated into answering the questions that have already been raised by Councillor Hunt, and then I'll call on those two members to ask their questions. So first of all, Justin Griffiths, would you please answer the question about the splay, and Councillor Hunt wanted to know, is it safe in those lanes? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Hunt, for your questions relating to highway safety, and obviously we've taken note of that in the assessment of this application. If I can answer those questions that you asked in relation to highway safety as a two-pronged approach, really, focusing predominantly first and foremost on the lane access. Now, the lane access is an established use, and you could clearly see in one of the photographs as well that Steve had showed in his presentation that there was vehicles using it. So it's frequently used currently as for vehicles anyway, so it's got an established use. With regards to visibility displays, we've only got control over new applications that come into the authority with regards to visibility. So i.e. we focus in on the land within the red line boundary in terms of visibility. This is already what we're seeing on the screen at the moment. Thank you, Steve, by the way. What we're seeing on the screen at the moment is the existing access, which is an established use, and vehicles have been utilising this access for quite a number of years. With regards to the visibility for the driveways for car parking spaces in particular, as you can see, there's a car at the top of the lane there, so that gives an example of the frequency of use, and vehicles can actually use it as well. It is a shared use, so there's always a concern with this type of access. It's just different to the carriageway and footways we see in that photograph there. But predominantly then, more onto the second point, we've asked for a scheme to be submitted for the two vehicles to show how the two vehicles will sit at the rear of the property, they will be set back in such a way that when they will actually reverse or pull out in the forward gear, they will have enough time to see visibility up and down the lane. There is sufficient width there for 2 vehicles. So we did do an assessment on that. A member of my staff who dealt with this application, and it was proven that it met the criteria in terms of highway standards. And also, I think the final point to make, which Councillor Hunt had raised with regards to the impact of I suppose traffic congestion, etc. is previously this development didn't have any parking, but now it seeks to put 2 additional spaces off street, so it's effectively taking cars off the highway network. So all said and done, in terms of highways, there is very, very little there for us to be obstructive on, and ticks all the boxes. So therefore, we offer no highway objection on that basis. I hope that's answered all of your queries there, Councillor Hunt. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Griffiths. I'm going to call on Kerry Morris because a question was actually put to him personally by Councillor Hunt. And then I can also see that Simon Evans is indicating he's an officer of environmental health, and I will come to you very shortly, Mr. Evans. So Mr. Morris, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've not got a huge amount to add really from what Steve has outlined. I mean, Steve has articulated the position in terms of the policy in SPG perfectly well. So I won't repeat that. Perhaps the only thing I would add is that just to draw attention to members that we will be bringing forward the LDP delivery agreement that's being reported to Regeneration and Sustainable Development Cabinet Board at the end of this month. So we'll be going out to consultation on that document, which members will be aware sets out the timetable and the community involvement scheme for the LDP. But members will be aware that, of course, it is quite an intensive, sort of prolonged programme. You know, we won't be having a new LDP in place until probably about another 3.5, potentially 4 years ahead. So this current LDP will remain in place as the development plan until that subsequent plan is adopted. The only thing I would perhaps add is that, as Steve has alluded to, every policy within that plan will have evidence to support its position. And what we might find is that we will potentially have more evidence available to us for a variety of topics, not just HMOs, prior to the formal adoption of the LDP. So I suppose what I'm indicating is that perhaps in terms of the broader assessments that we as officers will make in terms of the applications that come forward for HMOs, in the not too distant future, we might have further evidence locally that we can refer to and rely on in terms of sort of presenting that broader assessment of any applications that come forward. Obviously, we won't have the weight associated with a policy until the new LDP is adopted, of course, but members will I'm sure appreciate that. But yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to add to the conversation, Chair.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Mr. Morris. I'm going to call on Mr. Simon Evans now from Environmental Health. No specific questions were put to you, but I'd like to hear what you have to say, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to respond to one comment by Councillor Hunt. You asked what may occur in terms of monitoring antisocial behaviour when a property is occupied. Just to let you know that when applications for HMOs come in, I do have a look at what complaints have been received by Environmental Health in terms of noise and other nuisances for those HMOs that are identified as being in the locality. Just to give a bit of context to the planning officer of any issues that may occur. And I can let you know that for the 2 that have been identified in close proximity to this one, since it was given C4 approval in 2018, there's been no complaints regarding 177 Neath Road. And for the one identified in Vernon Street, we haven't had a nuisance complaint about that property since 2012. So for those 2, they seem to be particularly well run. I think that may well be because the one in Vernon Street is run by a housing association, so they may have a bit more control over it rather than perhaps some other ones. But yes, I just wanted to give you that information because you had raised it.
That's amazing. Thank you very much, Mr. Evans. Councillor Hunt, is it a comeback question, a follow-on question?
No,
No.
just briefly, Chair, I appreciate you letting me come back. Can I thank the officers for their in-depth responses, and recognise through policies. I just want to let Mr. Ball know I wasn't suggesting that the planning department look at any aspects of what HMOs create. Simon, thank you for that information. You've answered my question really, and that's the point I was raising. With other flats, I'm aware, as with my other hat, Chair, as you've got a number of hats yourself, with community safety, that public protection, that landlords and what Chris raised with flats and so forth, they bring in all sorts of, watch out what I say here, but a lot of different associated people, and that do cause a lot of problems. And as a Neath Talbot County Borough Council, through yourselves, where we perhaps have a bit of control, we are partners in the police and other places. So I just wondered, do we, when we deliver something like a HMO, do we then not just walk away and say, there we are, we'll move on to the next one, irrespective of what problems may occur at that property going forward? And you've answered me on two there. I'm not suggesting you're not right, but I am aware of some HMOs who do cause an awful lot of problems for the communities that they are situated in. So I was, Chair, just trying to find out our role as a council as a whole in respect to how we protect and support the communities that we pass planning on delivering HMOs in those wards. That's all it was. So thank you. Thank you all for your responses and policy questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Yes. What I would say is that when a planning application comes forward, this is, as Steve Ball has mentioned, for the use of the land. This is not about who was going to live in it. This is an application to change the use of the land. So we do have other departments, such as environmental health, who will handle things going forward. And I think you know, Mr. Councillor Hunt, that our departments are on top of this, and we are receiving from members anything that comes forward. I think it was very pertinent today that the figures for the area that we're looking at today were given by Mr. Evans, and I thank him for that. So yes, we are looking. We do keep on going, but it's not basically a planning concern. When it comes to planning, we deal with, is it a good use of the land? Is it a lawful use of the land? And then we rely on the other departments, once those decisions have been made, to make sure that residents are listened to should any problems arise. Okay. Councillor James, I will be coming back to you at the end. I always come back to the local member. So if we could let the questioning continue, you may have more that you wish to add. So I won't bring you in quite yet. Councillor Wilcock, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I would have been happy to see the local member pursue something if it's on what we're referring to now. Come in after if.
No, that's okay. That's okay, Councillor Hunt, because I think questions from committee members may give something to the local member to speak on at the end. So yeah. I'll let the debate unfold, and then I'll go back to the local member last of all. So, Councillor Wilcock, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just thought I'd be helpful there, but Chris is happy with that. That's fine. Yeah, yeah. Coming back to the point of needing a policy, Chair, I think it's patently obvious that we need to get on with this and come up with a policy on HMOs as soon as possible. If you remember, I previously asked in these contentious issues if the default position could be refusal, but I've been advised that cannot be, and I guess that is an understandable response to a default position of refusal, because if we haven't got a policy, then we have to decide whether we go ahead or not. So I can understand that. But what I think needs to happen, Chair, is that officers and members need to use the experience that we're currently going through in application after application for HMOs with the lack of a current policy when we develop a policy in the future. And of course, wherever possible, I think we need to take full account of local observations and come up with local decisions. The leader of Swansea, for example, Mr. Ball did touch on Swansea earlier on. The leader of Swansea, Sitting County of Swansea, has come out quite openly and suggested that it is quite unfair where decisions are taken locally to refuse such applications, and then they're overturned by the inspector. Where does local government come into that then? So I think it is important, Chair, that we develop this policy as soon as possible. Now, the question is, Chair, it's on page 14, top of page 14, that large paragraph there above the area plan. And it states at the bottom there that, however, members should also be aware that the properties in this block comprise a mixture of dwellings, and it goes to say class 3, class A1, class A3, and as such, it says, are not purely residential dwellings. Well, therefore, Chair, if this application is approved today, we'll also be in a position where we'll be reducing a limited number of class 3 dwellings that are currently available. I'm sure that Mr. Ball is going to tell me yes, but was that taken into consideration when coming up with a recommendation for approval? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Wilcock. I do think Mr. Ball has probably touched on this already, but I will call on Mr. Ball to answer that question. Have you taken into account the local feelings when you're coming into making the approval or not?
No, not local feelings, Chair. The reduction of one dwelling again.
Oh, I beg your pardon.
Yeah,
Mr. Ball, the reduction of dwellings rather than.
I know it's not about feelings. It's about a purely and on assessment base. I mean that assessment there in that paragraph you referred to effectively looks at a wider context. And yes, I mean we have obviously had regard to the fact that this isn't just a block of houses. It is 2 of 11 of the overall properties being there, but you couldn't, it would be very difficult to argue that if you added Domino's and the convenience and the barber to that, to argue that one HMO in that block effectively, or sorry, 2 HMOs in that block would then take it above and beyond the threshold. I think that'd be very difficult because it's a mixed block. It's not something that the policy, even in Swansea, wouldn't address those kind of points. And what it says is, 18% of the properties, i.e. 2 out of the 11, would be HMOs. And I think the actual assessment is looking at the wider context, which says there is a range of uses within that block. And within that wider context, it'd be very difficult to argue that this would create an intensification of housing and multiple occupation. So it is each on its merits. You have to look at the wider context. The wider context of this is there are different properties cited opposite, which are larger properties. And so it's not just this block. You have to look at the area and what's opposite and around it as well. And generally, that's what we've done in reaching our assessment.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ball. Okay, Councillor Wilcock, are you happy with the answer that you've received?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Very happy with that, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to call now on Vice Chair, Councillor Sean Percy, please.
Thanks, Chair. This has been quite an interesting discussion as usual on these HMOs. Kerry stole my thunder a little bit because the sort of point I was going to make was around this evidence base, and Steve's touched on it earlier on. We are making an assessment, a judgment on this application, on its impacts on the community, on its impacts on residential amenity, etc. So any evidence we can have regard to can feed into that process, regardless of whether there's a policy. And that was the notes I was sort of scribbling down. So I guess the point I kind of want to reinforce really is how when we go about this evidence gathering is what areas we want to focus on as well. And I think we need to have some regard to some of the issues that are being raised by the communities. Community cohesion is one particular issue. You know, there's evidence, and as I said, that's not particularly local, that's sort of floating around in the kind of planning universe at the moment. And I think we've got a lot of experience now, and you know, Chris has alluded to changes in his community. And I'm sure other members could refer to similar examples in their communities. And I think we perhaps need to have a bit of focus on where we feel the evidence base is lacking, because I certainly think when I look at like the Swansea policy, I'm not convinced that robustly addresses some of these issues. There's a lot open to interpretation. They are small streets policy, for example, you know, just says over concentration, but what is that? How do we assess when we get to that point? You know, they don't even have a threshold marker for that. And I think I certainly would like to see our planning officers sort of well armed with research and information so that we can tackle these issues, because I think we all feel a little bit powerless at the minute, and I think it's frustrating for us as members, and I'm sure to officers as well, in dealing with this. On the point Arwen raised, I think that's a really interesting one in terms of the mix of the properties as well. And I recall reading some concerns in Cardiff about an over-intensification of hot food takeaways, and you know, a judgment call there. So how many is too many in terms of the impact that takeaways have on residential properties? So you know, there's impacts associated with takeaways and with retail and with barber shops and with HMOs. And it kind of all needs to be considered in the round, isn't it? You know, it's a really complicated picture. But I just kind of want to reinforce that point. And certainly from my perspective as a local member, I would like to see us prioritise gathering that evidence as soon as we can, because this is an issue where I feel we've got the policy vacuum is there that we don't experience anywhere else in terms of this planning committee. This is the real outlier in my view. So I would sort of stress to officers if there was any way of prioritising gathering some of that local evidence, that we really do that. So thanks, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vice Chair. That very valid, well-made points there. And I'm sure that going forward, as we approach LDP2, obviously, these conversations will be taking place between local members and officers, and they will be taking place between local members and residents. And that information gathering will all feed in. And I'm hopeful that that will, if not alleviate fears, but it would still give a little bit more substance, as you've alluded to, Councillor Percy, to the decision making. The rationales behind these things and whether they're approved or not. So thank you for that. I would say on a personal level, the fact that this is here today in front of committee is noting this council's willingness to look into the minutiae of applications. I know that members are very busy. You know, we've had quite a few HMOs and we're all very well aware of where we stand with them. And I do agree with Councillor Percy in that sometimes we feel a little powerless. The Welsh Government planning law guides us and we have to abide by that. But going forward, I think it's very pertinent we have Kerry Morris here today, listening into the committee's viewpoints on things like HMOs, and I'm sure he'll be taking that away and working it into his plans for the LDP2 going forward. Okay, I don't see any more indications, therefore I will go back to Councillor James. If you have any further points you wish to make, Councillor James.
Yes, the reason I put my hand up earlier is I managed to read my writing, what I was meant to say when I messed it up. But before I come on to that, I just want to say about the policy, it's so important we need something in place, because as a local member, I'm getting Britain Ferries, the dumping ground, they're allowing HMOs here. I've got no evidence to back that up with the reason this has been allowed. And yes, I know you've got planning laws, but planning laws are quite complicated to explain to somebody on a doorstep. If we are straight, we're not the 10% threshold, 15% threshold. That would be something like black and white I can explain them really quickly. But it's so difficult with that. Just learning what Councillor Percy said about looking at the mix of properties, not just this property, but when we go into policy, we need to look at the mix of properties in the area, because although Britain Ferry might have a lower than 10% HMOs, we've got 25%. Britain Ferry East as a ward has got nearly 24.8 or 24.6% privately rented properties. So that's a huge part of it. And unfortunately, a lot of those landlords that own those private properties aren't the best of people, as Simon Evans will probably allude to. You know, we got some really bad landlords there, and it's a mix. When you combine that with HMOs, we haven't got many. There's not many social landlords in the area. In my ward, it does cause a lot of problems in the area. So that does need to be looked at when we look at the policy. But back to what's on the table in front of us today. The one thing I want to say, which I messed up when I said 13%. The 13%, it was a figure, 13%. Britain Ferry East has got 13% less house ownership than the Welsh average. That's 13% less than the Welsh average, which is a substantial figure. And again, what we're doing here is we're taking away another affordable family home, another chance for a young family, hard-working family, to get on that property ladder. And that's what I'm here appealing to your better nature today. Don't take another house away from Britain Ferry for a family, which will change the community over time. It's 49,500 you paid for this house. That's one of the few houses that someone on minimum wage could possibly afford. I just like to thank you and hopefully make this right decision and not lose another house from Britain Ferry.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Councillor James. That's quite eloquently put. I would say again, I'm going to stress again that we are looking at these HMOs individually. We're going through them quite comprehensively. We invite the local members to come and address. We look into all of their concerns. So even though there is no SPG at the moment, I feel that this committee is actually making a real effort to take each one on its merits. We do have to abide by Welsh planning law. We've got the right to change the recommendation or go against recommendation, but only if it's on planning grounds. And Mr. Ball has advised us today that this application gives us no reasons whatsoever to go against this recommendation. So I'm just going to leave it there. I don't see there's any other indications. Councillor Hunt, go on, I'll let you come back.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just for Chris's benefit as well, thank you for what you've just said, eloquently put. I think it's important when Chris makes a plea such as that members and that Chris understands what you have just said. And I would have loved to see a family in there on a personal level. I support all the points you raise, but the Chair have quite rightly said, what's in front of us today is what we've got to base our decision on. And so it's sort of with our heads rather than our hearts that we will be voting. But I needed to make that point, Chris, because sometimes messages go out to the planning committee, all pass another HMO, but they need to know why, for the reasons why we follow policies, Welsh policy and Neath Talbot policy. But I'm on board with what you were saying, and hopefully going forward, things can change for the better. And the last point, Chair, you mentioned it went to auction. Well, I would have thought that if there was a family who wanted that property, given how low the cost was, they probably would have bought it. And that's probably down to those families who might need a property. But I appreciate what you were saying. That's the only point I wanted to raise, because I didn't want to put myself, Chair, in a position that I'm voting to stop a family going to Britain Ferry. That's not the case. I'm following Mr. Ball's recommendations and what we as a committee have to deal with on a number of occasions.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt, and once again, I do thank you for saying that. Sometimes I feel that, you know, coming from the chair, it does sound too official, but coming from a member of the committee to recognise what we have to adhere to, I do thank you on that. Okay, then, I think we've had a full and frank debate on this. I'm going to take you to the recommendations on page 18. Just 1 second, I'll get there, which is to approve subject to the conditions set out on 18 and 19 onwards. Do I have someone to propose the recommendation?
I'm happy to move the recommendation, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcock. Do I have a seconder?
I will second that, Chair.
Okay, thank you. It's been forwarded and seconded. I'm going to ask now Tammy Davis, the Democratic Services Officer, to go through the roll call of voting members and ask them to confirm that they have been here for the whole of the debate, because sometimes with technology you may fall out, and which way you wish to vote. So, Mrs. Davis, please.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, I'll start with yourself, Chair. Have you been present for the whole of this item, and how would you like to vote?
Yes, I have been present for the whole item, and I'm going to vote in favour of the recommendation. Thank you.
Chair. Same questions to the following members of committee. Have you been present for the whole item, and how do you wish to vote? Councillor Sean Percy, please.
Thanks, I've been present for the whole item and I'll be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Dennis Keogh.
Thank you, Tammy. I can confirm that I've been here for the entire meeting and I shall be voting with the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Rydian Mason.
Yes, I have been present for the whole item, Tammy, and I'll be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Ros Davis, please.
I've been present for the whole item and I'm voting for the recommendation. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch. Councillor Steve Hunt, same questions, please.
Yes, I've been here for the whole item and I'll be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Arwyn Wilcock.
Yes, Chair, I confirm that I've been present for the whole agenda item and I'll be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Prothero.
Thank you, Tammy. Yes, Chair, I can confirm I've been here for the whole item and I will be voting for the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Suzanne Renkers, please.
Get been present for the whole of the item and vote for.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor. That recommendation, Chair, has been approved.
Thank you very much, committee, for your attention this morning, and I'm hoping that the officers will have listened in depth and take forward all that's been said regarding HMO and the policy going forward. So thank you very much for your attendance. I have no further items. Let's just say go back to the agenda. Excuse me. I have no urgent items, so therefore this meeting is concluded. Thank you for your attendance. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chair. Could everyone just stay on just for a couple of minutes, please? We can pause, stop recording.
Oh, if you could stop the recording, please.
Okay.
Yeah, did everybody hear that? Mr. Ball is asking if you